So we'll open the floor for public comment at this time.
I'll go.
You're good, Kelly.
Okay, I
Yeah.
didn't know if someone had their hand up.
Nope.
Hi, I'm Kelly from Bristol. Welcome back. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the revised monitoring report 2.2, and I would just like to make a statement on that. That to me, it feels like monitoring report 2.2 treatment of staff was not really revised much at all. Many board members stated, and it's recorded, that they were rejecting the report due to lack of evidence around treatment of staff, but mentioned most retaliation of staff. I'd like to note that Patrick still does not give a valid interpretation of retaliation, even in his revised report. Even with such overwhelming concern of retaliation voiced by board members who rejected this report initially 3 months ago. After reviewing the revised report, I see no additional data on any of the concerns that originally led the board to rejecting it on May 28th. So I don't see any reason in which it would be accepted now. I would ask that you, the board, reject it and officially ask Patrick to bring more data to support his report. The supporting data mentioned previously by the board was specifically a new staff survey that would be fairly given to all staff, unlike it was in May. Thank you.
Hey, Kelly, before you leave, if you want that whole thing you just said verbatim, if you could send a copy to me to attach to the minute.
You got it.
Thanks.
That's better than asking you to fix it.
Yeah, that works better too, for sure. Anyone else in the room?
I wanted to just wait till after people on Zoom.
Any public on Zoom that'd like to give a comment? Don't see anybody jumping up.
Hey, everybody, Shauna from Bristol. Nice to see you guys. I hope you had a good summer. I just wanted to also piggyback on the treatment of staff monitoring report. My concern is that it seemed like that it was, I mean, it wasn't a super clear directive, but if the directive was taken enough that to look into a new staff survey, that was done in the same comments as sending out a new survey as is. So it seemed like that was the expectation that, and I even voiced from a lot of people that they thought a new survey was going to be going out. And I don't see why a new one can't be done before accepting the report as is. Additionally, in the meeting in May, there was questions saying that if there is a concern for retaliation, that somebody should come forward and say so. And I know since then somebody did come forward and say so. So I still don't believe that the monitoring report accurately reflects that as far as compliance goes. So I know that person, they weren't able to be here tonight, but they did still want an executive session, and hopefully they can, because they do deserve to be heard as well. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, we'll move on. The next is an action item to approve the agenda. Can I please get a motion? So Melissa?
Second.
Kathy, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next is our consent agenda, which we do all at one time. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? Justin?
I'll second.
Kristen? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next is our executive limitations monitoring. So the first is an action to approve the revised monitoring report 2.2. Remember, when you make a motion, it opens the floor for discussion. Okay. Can I please get a motion?
I move that we approve the revised monitoring report 2.2.
Thank you, Mike. A second?
Second.
Brad? Okay, now we can discuss revised monitoring report 2.2.
So I'm in favor of approving this in the sense that I think we, had subsequent discussions that really focused on us as a board needing to be more clear with expectations and think about what this policy looks like moving forward. And so that this seems to fit where the expectations were. And so if there's a disconnect, it's really where we set the expectations relative. And so that in that sense, this report meets those previous expectations, even if that's not where we want to be in the future. So I think approving this allows us to move forward in this process while knowing that we're going to improve the process so that we can have the kind of robust monitoring that we in the community have asked for. But that there wasn't really a good way to do that without that sort of longer process.
Anyone else?
So what, I think our concern was that we didn't have adequate data. So what is there in this report that outlines how to collect the appropriate amount of data? I didn't see it.
So as part of that discussion Mike was talking about, we talked about how that is gonna unfold.
Mhm.
And so between our last meeting and now, Patrick has met with MAEA to discuss the staff survey. And we've come up with our monitoring schedule that we're going to do. And policy and governance will need to incorporate this as one of their first things they're doing, so that we give Patrick what our expectations are going forward, so that the data is clear for those. But moving the goalpost for this past one was tough, like Mike was trying to describe, to get what we were asking for in the context Patrick was writing, which was different because it was a previous board's context and not ours.
So next year's will be our
Was ours.
context
Yep.
Exactly.
and our
Yep.
directives.
Correct.
Okay.
And also a reminder that policy and governance is down to just 2 of us out of 4 in our last meeting. So I'm just want to put this out on behalf of policy and governance. If you're interested in joining policy and governance this year, it would be a great time because I'm guessing we would love extra people.
We're gonna do a little bit of that work today too.
Yeah.
Okay, so all those in favor then, unless there's any other discussion about that. All those in favor of approving revised monitoring report 2.2, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, we have a budget.
Wait, I'm abstaining. I'm sorry, you didn't ask abstaining. I'm abstaining. Okay,
Thank you, Daniela.
thank you.
I stopped asking for abstaining because we weren't capturing them in the minutes, but I'll continue just in case.
Aaron, I'm sorry, would you like me to capture? Normally abstentions aren't captured in minutes. But I can if that's what you want. That's why I don't record them.
Yeah. It doesn't bother me either way. But
Well, just going, I mean, if the members would like the abstentions, I don't name the person, I would just say one
One.
abstention if you want me to do that.
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you.
like that, are people okay with a recording of abstention?
Absolutely.
Cool beans.
Clear. Yep.
Yes, please. Thank you, Vicky. All right, so the budget preview was sent under separate cover. It was sent this afternoon.
And it'll be included in the minutes, and I will pull up the presentation.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah. All right, I will preface this by saying this is by far the greatest depth we've ever gone in a budget presentation in August.
Nice job.
So, part of that caveat is, like, there are a lot of moving pieces in December when we present the budget to you. The number of moving pieces in August is exponentially greater than what you would see later on. So take everything with a big grain of salt. But this at least starts the conversation and kind of gives us sort of eyes wide open going into FY 26. Do our darndest to avoid a repeat of FY 25. I think that's the spirit with all of this. But we'll also say that you probably all received or saw a joint letter around budgets and sort of things to be watching for as FY 26 comes out. It was produced by VASBO, VSBA, and VSA, I think. So that's the school business officials, superintendents, and school board association. So we try to lean on that as we kind of built this presentation as well. So let's start. This should have been something we've shared every year for the past, I don't know how many years, but what's new this year with the budget building process? Because it feels like every year for a while, there's been some pretty significant new things that we have to understand, apply, and then determine what the ramifications are. So the excess spending penalty is not really new. We've had it before. So it's kind of coming back, but it looks a little different this time around than what we had a few years ago. Formerly, the excess spending penalty was if your cost per pupil was greater than 121% of the average cost per pupil, you paid a dollar for dollar tax. So for every dollar your budget was in excess of that threshold, you were taxed twice. So it was a pretty stiff penalty. This year it's 118% plus NEEP, so an inflationary index. Right now, that figure is estimated to be a little over $16,100 per pupil. It is still the double taxation on the amount above that threshold. And now payments on bonds, that's principal and interest payments on bonds that are secured after July 1st of 24, that counts toward your cost per pupil. That used to be exempted from your cost per pupil. And if you have a bond that was secured prior to July 1st of 24, that principal and interest payment doesn't count against you. So it doesn't really apply to us. We don't really have, we have almost zero debt. So basically any bond that we might go for from this point forward, we would have to count those payments toward our cost per pupil in this spending threshold. Also, capital reserve funds that you have that are older than 5 years count against your cost per pupil. Our current understanding is, even if you don't spend that money, just sitting in your account, you have to count that money toward your cost per pupil. And we do have 240 some thousand.
We're showing 244 seasoned funds that are 5 years or older. But one of the misses I had in this slide, I'm sorry, it's 150% of your capital reserve funds older than 5 years count toward your cost per pupil. So there's it counts towards your, if you have a savings account that's older than 5 years, it counts against your cost per pupil, and there's a punitive on it as well.
So if you have $100,000 in capital reserve funds that are more than 5 years old, you have to apply $150,000 toward your spending to count against the cost per pupil threshold.
So the policy here is to spend your money as to reduce current costs as opposed to saving for the future. Is that right? Okay.
In a climate where
Right.
costs to make significant repairs to structures is very high,
Prohibited.
and there's a lot of it,
Right.
a lot of need.
Without
Patrick,
extended state dollars.
we can't see your budget on Zoom.
Thank you. I'm gonna
Yeah.
share my screen. Thanks for that, Beth.
Yeah.
So Floyd, when we moved our capital reserve funds into the general fund, that still counts, right? We voted, was it last year? They voted to move.
We pulled some money out of capital reserve to cover the shortfall on the spending for the lobby bathrooms project.
Uh-huh.
Of about 400,000. There was an authorization to move significantly more.
Right.
And given the rules that we had at the time, we left it in our savings account. In hindsight, we should have pulled all of the 5-year-old money out. Right? I mean, that's the reality. And the money that's in there now, Patrick and I were talking about it earlier. Do we look to get something on the November ballot to liquidate that 244,000 on a project that we're currently working on in order to avoid the hit? We're not over the number, but if it's seasoned, we're going to have to deal with it at some point. And it is in the 5-year window. It's an interesting, with no support for capital construction from the state, and then a penalty for being prudent in saving money seems somewhat at odds. Did I say that out loud?
I'm glad you know, I'm glad you did.
I may follow up on that, just where like the sort of facilities and finance side, it seems that those last 2 bullet points make it prohibitive to do any sort of long-term facilities, like.
Yeah, you can't.
I would say
long
it's
term.
even more prohibitive. It's already somewhat
Right,
prohibitive.
But-
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
anything you spend essentially on the facilities now are costs per pupil. Right, there's no way to separate anything maintenance facilities wise from educational spending. It's all being lumped in with those.
Right.
The exception being capital reserve funds less than 5 years.
Less than 5 years. But then you have to raise those anyways, so. And that goes through the per pupil spending in that given year, yes.
I will have to look at that. I don't know that that's true. I don't know if you have a capital reserve. Now, so you basically already paid taxes on that, right? So typically we get a capital reserve because we have a fund balance from the year prior
Mhm.
that people have already been taxed to generate. And then when we don't spend it, we put it in a savings account to be able to tackle some of these big projects. So I don't think if it's less than 5 years old and you spend it, it counts against you. We'd have to check that.
I would say the wording isn't entirely clear, but it doesn't say that it would be counted. It's only funds that are 5 years or older.
And that's where for me, because they specifically call out 5 years or older, will count against you. Presumably, if it's less than 5 years, you can use it and it doesn't count against you. At least not at the 150% rate.
Are we getting interest on that 5-year-old money in the capital reserve? Yeah, is that what they're trying to?
Want to prevent us
Really?
from doing that.
Yeah, they're trying to.
So if we were to take a bond, that we would have to have a 5-year bond. I mean, there's no more 10, 15-year bonds.
No, because the.
Any bond will be subject.
Taxed, will still taxed.
It's not, the length of bond will not, there's no workaround on a bond. You go borrow money for capital projects. And that cost, when it used to be able to be carved out, is now part of your spending per pupil.
In fact, the longer the bond is actually still better now because you'll have that much less principal and interest in a year that you have to count against your.
The second year is a killer. You're gonna
But it's
get
almost like they're
hit by it, yeah.
kind of directing you to do your long-term 5-10-year planning on your capital structures through bond financing versus a savings
Holding on to
account.
it, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And frankly, that's always been the best way to go
It's
because
cheaper.
construction costs escalate a lot faster than
Yeah.
what, bond payments are, so, or interest payments.
Daniela?
Yeah, so I don't like counting my chickens before they hatch, but I'm aware that we have the Commission on Future Public Education and that they've also that they're supposed to have the report done by December and that they also just spun off an education finance subcommittee and that the AOE is working with legislators right now to change how we're going to be funding construction costs. So with knowing that we are actually in a incredibly volatile policy landscape right now, how are you all doing this? Like, we don't even know what's going to happen. I think this might be more of a Floyd question. Like, I'm all for us moving forward, but it looks like a lot of things are slated to change in the middle of the year. And I haven't been through this process before. So how do you navigate that?
It's really a matter of, and we've unfortunately been in this situation almost every year where they're writing legislation that might apply immediately while you're late in the budget building process, might apply retroactively after you've built your budget, or it might apply for the subsequent budget building. And we can't know that until the legislation's written and acted into law. So it's a lot of best guessing. And again, leaning right now very heavily on the joint letter that came out, which is the best source we can get right now.
There
This
there
is-
is pressure
yeah.
being brought to bear with AOE, with tax and with the legislature, that this is a very difficult umbrella to try and work under. Not just these capital funds, but the funding and rules changing on the fly. I mean, look back to January when we thought we could limit our tax increase to 5% regardless of our spending, based on the
Yeah.
law as written.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate this. This isn't normally my area of expertise, but I've been trying to follow the commission work this summer, so I appreciate knowing how it's going to be moving, and I sure hope that the folks in the commission will fix this, because this isn't fair to do to districts every year. Okay, that's all. Thanks for your work.
But wait, there's more. How the tax rate is calculated is different. So I couldn't copy and screenshot. I couldn't get the graphic as pretty as what came out in this joint letter. But current, or sort of the old formula, was your cost per pupil divided by the yield. That figure then divided by your town's CLA. That's your tax rate. The new process is your cost per pupil is divided by a figure that is the yield divided by the statewide average CLA. That figure then is divided by the product of the town CLA divided by the statewide average CLA. The idea here is, by bringing in the statewide average CLA, the volatility you get from town to town is diminished. Your pre-CLA tax rate is a whole lot closer than to your post-CLA tax rate when they bring in this statewide average to kind of level that equation out a bit. And that's what's sort of at play here. And so I tried to bring that to kind of an example using what we had for FY25. So we presented to you this prior formula, and I'll use Bristol because of the town CLA, which before the 2 cents got taken out. So one of the new pieces of legislation that was written last time around had us as sort of a disadvantage by the weighting change. We got to take 2 cents off of our tax rate. So this does, I was trying to minimize the number of variables that we're showing here. So I didn't include that 2% decrease anywhere. So without that, using the prior formula, a tax rate of 2.007 in Bristol, same figures, new formula, 2.006. So for us, it's not at this point in time showing a huge impact to the post-CLA tax rate. There are likely to be, as there's been with all these other changes, there are going to be some folks that are way on the left side of the continuum and others way on the right side of the continuum in terms of how this change will impact them. We seem to be pretty neutral.
And you're looking at fiscal year 25, because to try and project in the three variables of town CLA, statewide CLA, yield as set by the state, I don't have enough socks to pull it out of. So this gives us a snapshot of what the impact would be in our current year, with no real clarity of its impact in 26, because we don't know what our CLAs might be then locally.
And to Daniela's point, everything we've said so far and everything we'll say after this is subject to change pending the commission on the future of public education. Like, that everything's on the table, I guess, for that, so.
So I shouldn't even bring this up, but I'm going to, but I have a real concern about the PCB, like testing within the schools, and if they find that something needs to be fixed, what do we do then? And how does that impact all of us?
That is the $1 million question. What we do then depends on,
Billion.
Yeah, mega million.
is it a $40,000 remediation and we can just get it done? Or is it a $7 million remediation and we're starting the school year off intense like they are in the Northeast Kingdom right now?
The Burlington High School where you knock the building down?
Yeah. And that's come under screen.
The only answer is it depends. It could be absolutely nothing. There are schools testing completely clean
That'd be
and
great.
others have a huge impact and there's a lot in between.
Are we on some sort of a schedule to be tested?
We have been on a schedule for over a year at this point. And they've paused it, then the pause stopped, but the schedule changed and we got bumped back and we got bumped back. I don't know, like,
We are currently scheduled to be tested in the spring and summer of this year.
meaning the
So,
spring that has passed and the
that
summer
has
that is
passed.
almost.
Oh, 24.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's
And we
our
don't yet
current
have a
schedule
date from the testers when they're coming.
with, and there's the. We're not sure what the state's doing. They're not pushing this forward because they don't have a plan to fix it and there's no money.
Mhm.
I mean, the $4 million is what they allocated for this.
But none of that's gonna affect this, right?
No.
That's-
Not at all.
Thanks for bringing that up.
So, yes, any questions about
Still there.
this?
By this budget though, by this budget going through, will all 4 of the towns have undergone complete reappraisal? Starksboro's been done, New Haven's undergone. When was Bristol done?
I haven't heard about Bristol.
haven't
I haven't heard
Monkey-
anything
monkey's
else.
done.
Moncton's done?
Yeah. I think Bristol's the question mark right now. I don't
Bristol's the
know.
hang up.
I haven't heard a word about Bristol getting started. Like there's not even any murmurings or dates or anything yet that I've heard.
And it's the volatility of a Starksboro Moncton with the CLAs up above 1.0.
Yep.
Historically, that shows greater volatility to change than ones that are under.
And just the range, like it's unprecedented as far as I'm aware. We have Starksboro right now with a CLA of 129% and Bristol at 72.
Mm.
Almost twice the CLA, like a 10 point swing at a CLA is huge. We're talking about such a huge range. It's unprecedented. I
This
think
is a
that's
beautiful day out.
It's like a living through unprecedented.
I know.
I'm right there with you. All right, so the income sensitized formula is also changing. It's really unclear right now exactly how to calculate that change and the impact and exactly what that is. So more to come on this. We do have a slide that shows income sensitized potential impact with the what if budget. But it's using the old formula because we don't really have enough clarity to even take a stab at something new yet. Is that a fair characterization?
Sure, and within the income sensitized for the current year, there's a 13% kicker for those who are receiving income sensitized prebates. And for us to take a stab at what that impact is that matrix based on value of property, income, it is pretty volatile. And we're just, you're chasing a number that's not going to be accurate and probably not even close to accurate. So we're waiting for a little bit of clarity to be a little more accurate.
And then the last thing for now that's new is the ballot language. So really before, really all that was required was districts ask for an amount of money to be approved. That's part of the new language that's required, but we also have to talk about what is happening to your cost per pupil and what percent change in the cost per pupil the new budget proposes. That's now required by legislation.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
I think it gives a little bit.
It helps us.
Yeah, it does.
Well, it just helps that clarity on the ballot. If somebody's not come to the presentation at all, at least it gives them an idea of how much should this go up or down per pupil, of course, but.
And we don't have to wordsmith it. It's uniform. It's
Yep.
already done.
So some assumptions that are behind the numbers, and you can see this is a list and there's even more assumptions behind this probably. So as we've done every year prior, we've taken all of the prior year, which is obviously still pretty brand new for us right now, and just keep all of those same programming personnel and roll that forward as our starting point to see if we did that, where does that land us? With lots of assumptions in there. 4% inflation is something that was referenced in that joint letter. So we typically have 2 or 3% that we put in as sort of a general inflationary number. We put the 4% in for this. We do have a settled agreement for support staff, so we have that new information that we can include in FY26. And we have to make assumptions about what to put in FY26 for what would be a new settlement with professional staff. We don't know where that's going to land. This assumes a 17% increase in healthcare premiums, which again was referenced in that joint letter. Seems unbelievable that we have yet another year, but I think this is my 9th year as superintendent. I think once we had under double digits and it was 9%. So it continues to increase dramatically. And that's a huge, I don't know, you have the top of your head, Floyd, to understand like what does 17% translate into dollars?
Yeah, which is
We'll do a little homework. It's
almost $46,000 for a family plan.
that's the premium on a family, one family plan. Yeah.
Well, how much deductible?
That's probably the gold CDHP, so $5,000 deductible that the district pays the first 4,200 of, 4,250
So it's a $750 deductible per family.
on the
But
back
it's on
end,
the back end of the file.
only if they exceed the 4,250. It's a great plan, no doubt, and expensive and getting more. We made some estimates with a long-term weighted average daily membership, looking at our current enrollment. And applying formulas as best we can. That's a tricky figure to pin down. So when we get it in December, late November, early December from the state, that's we have historically been pretty close, but it is definitely an estimate. There is no spending threshold tax impact. We do have some money that we could get tagged with if we don't do something with that to not have it sitting in that account. But even if we had to apply that, we're far enough away from the projected threshold that we wouldn't exceed that threshold and be in a penalty stage. So it looks like we're again at this point in time with lots of assumptions that we won't be bumping up against that spending threshold yet. What we saw when we had the spending threshold before was we were at one point a long way from that spending threshold. And then the next budget cycle, we got quite a lot closer to that spending threshold. And then each year we got a lot closer till eventually we were up against that threshold. So I'll offer that saying, yay, doesn't look like we're close right now. And it's still wise to be financially prudent to not close that gap because it's not a fun place to be when you're up against that threshold. We are expecting slightly less revenue, special education revenue and tuition from Lincoln. We expect to be a bit less for FY26 than FY25. We are, as Floyd said, we're using the current CLAs because we don't have anything to use to make assumptions about how they would change.
Wait, Patrick, can you go back to tuition adjustment? Is it because we have fewer Lincoln students coming into the school district?
Yes.
Yep.
And spec ed because
What are the details behind it?
Reimbursement was in fiscal year 24 finished was less than we had projected and less than we projected. And we think fiscal year 25 is a little high in projected revenue, recognizing that your expense line,
right.
you know, that's an offsetting, you get reimbursement for the excessive spending excess spending. But we know our revenue is gonna drop. Some within the special ed, we softened our projection in that.
So it assumes the same yield as we had for FY 25, because again, hard to know what's going to happen with that yield. And the state CLA adjustment is definitely going to impact that. So when you generate your pre-CLA tax rate using your cost per pupil and the yield. When we know that's going to change to be closer to your post-CLA tax rate, the only way that can be true is the yield goes down. So we're expecting that yield to decrease, but most of the effect of that decrease to be offset by the introduction of the average statewide CLA. But it's likely that yield drops thousands.
Significant.
Yeah. $2,000 or $3,000, which is huge, but again, offset. Sort of a known thing, but just stating it again, we also don't have ESSER funds available anymore. Those are to be expended by the end of September. And I mentioned the 4% inflation. These are some of the assumptions, or the majority, the big assumptions anyway, behind a lot of the figures that you'll see. This is something that we have, in particular early on, we've included this in our presentations just to kind of get a sense of what we're looking at from an enrollment perspective. And you can see elementary schools, for the most part, except Robinson, are kind of leveling off from an enrollment perspective. Robinson still seems to be on the decline. Hard to know exactly when that will plateau. And MAUSD continues to experience the decline we saw go through the elementary schools, and will for several more years as that decline works its way through kind of the egg through the snake situation. And for the most part, with a couple of bubbles, you can see sort of at least a trickle down from for a total enrollment for the district. This is kind of how that translates into class sizes across the elementary schools. And again, this is current, so this is not projected to FY 26. This is this year right now. With an outlier being Robinson this year. They had an influx of sixth graders, which kind of put what was going to be a 5-6 over what we thought of as an acceptable class size. And there was no other sort of combination of classes that wouldn't violate some of our staffing rules that we came up with. So that prompted the need to add a classroom at Robinson. We added it as a one-year position because this bigger sixth grade class will move on, and presumably we can rework with that one less teacher again going forward. But that does give them this year sort of an unusually low class size, especially compared to some of the other schools.
Patrick, what are the other school districts in the area looking at for enrollment projections? And we're at 1134. That's a pretty low number.
I don't know. I have to talk with the other superintendents to see. I think, generally speaking, I think what folks are seeing is more rural areas decreasing in enrollment and more urban areas increasing in enrollment. So when you look at South Burlington, for example, they're trying to find places to put all of their students.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look most elsewhere outside of Chittenden County, basically in Vermont, I think enrollment decline is more the experience.
So at what point, and I don't remember from the Livingston report, at what point what is the tipping point for us to look at consolidation again, to revisit consolidation? Are we beyond
It's
that?
a matter of individual perspective.
Are we beyond
I made a
that?
case for it 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It didn't win people over. I don't know what that tipping point is. I will say what is different, and we knew this 5 years ago, like we didn't get where we thought we'd get the way I thought we'd get there. But we are where I was afraid we were going to end up when we were looking at enrollment projections and looking at cost increases and cost per pupil. And this was before COVID, before they sunsetted or at least paused the spending threshold penalties and all those sorts of things. And so I think what wasn't true then, but is true now, the sort of feeling of the pain, that wasn't, we didn't have that luxury, we'll say, when we talked about some potential big change. I think the pain is felt much more so now. I think people, and we saw the attention that we got with our last budget. Like people are tuned in more than I would say generally they were 5 years ago.
On the previous slide, Patrick, on the enrollment, as far as the 1134, that doesn't include the Lincoln students in the enrollment, right? Or
Yeah, that includes the addition of, so we're assuming 9 Lincoln students coming in next year.
Okay. Okay, so the numbers, well, the numbers in the far right-hand column, do they add up to 1134?
Should.
Oh, okay,
I think they do.
so those 9 would be in the 569.
Correct.
Okay,
The 9 additional,
right, okay.
or the 9 coming in this year, and off the top of my head, I don't know what graduated
Right.
in
And
June.
as is true with any of these figures, it's a point in time reference. So this will change. And in fact, Mount Abe was projecting far fewer students than what this is showing. And they had a pretty substantial influx over the summer.
Can you go back, because the important thing to note is if you look at fiscal year 21-22, 695 to 569, it's not 130 student drop, because we use an equalized pupil or long-term weighted average. That number in the high school is really impactful on our per student because of the accelerator that is inherent in the secondary schools. So when you see a 130 person drop, really it's a 220 with a new LTW, maybe a little bit greater drop in our LTW ADM, which drives our spending per pupil, which drives our tax rate. So this is the egg through the snake hitting the high school where it is the most painful in terms of our per pupil spending.
We've really gotten somewhere that made sense to you guys. Like, that's wasn't that long ago. So again, class sizes as they stand currently. And other than that one Robinson position, there would be no projection at this point in time to have fewer staff. This is just sort of a reminder that we have these class size guidelines. And these are driven pretty directly from the education quality standards, which are changing. I think a lot of this stays true. It may adjust a bit, but these are our current guidelines. And here's what that all means in terms of dollars and cents. So you can see on here, expenses to expenses, an increase of almost 6%, which when you figure in what we're looking at for insurance increases, when you're looking at salary increases, you look at a 4%, just sort of baseline, everything goes up. 5% increase in the construction services line, because that's probably a fair bit less than what construction costs are actually going up, but it's trying to not lose too much ground. That all comes out to a little less than 6% increase spending over spending. Which again, sadly, makes sense in today's context. That would be twice what was acceptable 15 years ago. Revenue down a little bit, as Floyd mentioned, a little over 300,000, which gives us that new increased education spending line. So again, that ed spending is what's divided by our long-term weighted average daily membership, which again goes down. So you have spending up, long-term weighted average daily membership down, and that double effect is what gives us a little bit more of a steep increase in our cost per pupil at 9.27% over the current year with the numbers that you're seeing here. So that would be the figure that shows up on the ballot now, right? So per pupil spending of 15,654, which is 9.27% more than the current year. And then again, that cost per pupil is in terms of sort of what the board controls from a driving the tax rate perspective, cost per pupil is that tipping point. So here's what that does to the tax rate. About 13 cents or a little over 9%.
This is net of the 2 cents.
Right, so the 2 cents is calculated here. And I don't have to remind all of you, because you're getting your tax bills too. That's 9% on what is a bigger number now than was last year, pretty substantially for some people.
Yeah.
Then here's, again, using current CLAs because that's as good as we have at this point in time. And then you can see what that tax rate does. And this is using the new formula to each town. And then translating that into dollars and cents. You can see we kept the same process. It's probably worth a conversation. The cost per 100,000 is always the way we've kind of shown the monetary impact for those that are not income sensitized. A pretty substantial change to that context now is what for some was quite a spike in how many hundreds of thousands their house is assessed at. So seeing, 186 or 182 per 100,000 is not necessarily unfamiliar. But when your house was 200,000 and it's now 400,000, it's actually feels like twice that. So I don't know how to necessarily capture that in a way that people can wrap their head around, but it's an important part of the context, I think. And it varies home to home. Some homes doubled, others went up a lot less than double. So
with this rosy picture that you presented us.
oh, one more slide.
All right.
This is the income sensitized, which again is, there's a lot that needs massaging in this because of the changes that we don't quite have our heads wrapped around yet. An important takeaway though is the median income from 2021 to 2022 for Addison County increased 13%. What was the 10%? So there was a big jump in the median income. That is also important to calculate in this sort of mash up of budgety stuff. People are earning more substantially, according to this information, than they did in 21.
So what can we do now? This is such a rosy picture. Is there anything that this board can do now to be proactive? So that we don't hand a 9.8% increase to anybody in our district.
I think one of the notes I made to myself for the facilities and finance was, what is our plan?
Yeah.
So what is our plan for our student base and our buildings? Are we keeping all of our buildings? Are we consolidating? What is our plan? Because then that's going to influence how much money do we need. So then do we do that through the construction services line in our next year budget, or do we go for a bond, right? Like there's so many unknown variables because we don't know yet what our plan is.
And I would say part of what makes it hard to formulate a plan is we have this commission on the future of public education that has some, I don't know if power, yeah, maybe weight is a better term than power, influence, right? So there could be, and there may not be, really substantial recommendations that come out of that work. Like really substantial in terms of how many schools we have in the state and how that impacts MAUSD, who knows? They may say you've got to close 2 schools. They may, and this has historically been the way it happens. They may create conditions where that may be your only option, but they leave it to local decision makers to make it happen. So it's so hard to make even a 5-year plan right now when you know that kind of big work is churning in Montpelier. And the range of what could come out of that is huge.
Yeah, understood. It unfortunately means you have to be agile. So you come up with a plan and you have to be ready on a dime, it's so easy. change that plan and navigate through it, but it
Mhm.
results in sometimes throwaway work.
And there's something to be said if we were able to achieve the efficiencies that they're sort of in pursuit of at the statewide level, locally, do they look at that work and say, you've done it? So everything we're talking about at the state level, you're sort of ahead of, and we're not gonna undo or redo all the work that you just did to achieve that. If we fall short of what they came up with, maybe there would still be, so that's where the agility comes in, but it's hard to be agile when you're talking about big change that has been controversial for a long
Oh,
time.
yeah, no, understood.
Yeah.
I think that, obviously planning is important, but, given that we're faced with a fiscal 26 budget, we're gonna have to put before the voters, I think it's just as important to, get this information out now rather than so that people will come out of the woodwork, so to speak, sooner rather than in March or February.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the plan is or what the recommendation is, but I see no reason why not to get this out into, on the website very prominently, and also do a little bit of, sort of, marketing of it and say it's there to look at now, and now's the time to provide input rather than waiting until. Be very upfront about it. That's
Sure.
One of the problems we had last year is everybody came in at the last minute and had all these complaints, and our hands were tied. It was too late, really, to make a lot of changes.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and I think you need to recognize that at that time, we also got a lot of pushback from our community to not cut
right,
positions, or maybe even add some positions.
right.
I had one thought, Patrick, while you were talking, and the Truex assessment that we're nearing completion on. There was some conversation about, money from the state being directed to, schools that are well positioned. In the assessment preview that we got from Truex, there was a flavor that we're poised better than a lot, which would put us in a better position with what the assumed direction that this commission is trying to work towards in terms of how to invest in the schools that are aging.
And then two of the factors anyway that came up in that conversation about what positions us well is the work we've done in recent years to make facilities improvements, which is not true in a lot of places, and the money we have in a sort of our operating budget to continue to chip away at those things. So that combination positioned us well to receive some of these funds that they're earmarking potentially. Another thing that's in motion.
Potentially, we'll see.
So I'm just thinking on a higher plane here. We get this information out to the community, community is probably gonna have a reaction. And it would give them time, because we're in a position, I feel, that we have to be reactionary to what the state decides. So I think this would give the community time to maybe, write to their legislature,
Before the election.
before, and get some power from the community out to what's happening at the state.
And there will be, by design and by statute, public engagement opportunities with this commission on the future of public education as well. So that could get people primed for participating in those.
So maybe our role is to educate the community and say, here's your opportunity.
Yeah.
Help us.
Go forth.
I think we have an agenda item. Maybe.
Yeah.
I wrote it down already.
How would, getting an op-ed in the paper, or maybe having an interview in, Angela. I think he would be all over this. Probably have some very helpful things to say,
Mhm.
interview you.
I thought I saw Marin's face on earlier, so.
You did.
I think they're tuned in.
I think it's important that we look at it a little bigger than our district, right? The school boards across the state may not be where we are today, right? We're we're in August talking about stuff that we would talk about November, December. And it's entirely likely that there's a lot of districts that are still in that November, December launch of budget discussions. So from a school board standpoint, if any influence you have across the state to push that conversation forward, which then shows statewide the same issue that we're facing, because nothing is changing organically in our state from where we were last year and the wrestling match we had with taxation.
Are there any more smaller consolidations? And you did a great job with the food services. Are there any other smaller consolidations that we can initiate this year?
I mean, I think there's always potential. They end up being a drop in the bucket at best is the unfortunate part. Like even the food service consolidation, like we effectively have 1.0 FTE less than we'd be paying for on our own because we're sharing. We split 0.5 of the director and we split 0.5 of the assistant director. So that, and you know, we're exploring some relationships that are maybe less about saving money, but more about sustaining programming as we continue to experience these reductions. So it's not really a cost savings necessarily. I hope to have something to bring to the board in one of the next couple of months to share a little bit more about what we're trying to pull off of that. Pretty limited. It's kind of hard to be two separate entities and try to run them as though they're one. There are limitations to how far the efficiencies can go, and that's true.
Liz?
The two other forms of consolidation, one is in our hands as a school board, and that's consolidating the 6th grade services at Mount Abe. That is a school board, we have authority on that, and we have authority to put forward to our voters the possible school closure. And that could be on the ballot in November. And if it's not accepted by the individual town, then it's not, and it becomes a part of the bigger picture. So I think we could consider putting options forward for that. And we might have those two pieces going well for us for getting funding from the state, about having money in our budget in the other one. But the other factors that I saw shared with us were also utilizing the capacity of our buildings well. And we could consider that. And I don't know.
I was gonna just jump in and say, I guess it'd be helpful at some point, maybe just get a gauge the board or Patrick, Floyd, your thoughts. Like, it seems like we're not in the worst case scenario, right? We're, even if we keep the status quo, we stay under this like penalty threshold. And at the same time, if we keep the status quo, it's another 9-point-something% increase, which is not in the best position by any means, right? And so it feels like we should maybe early on try to get some sense in terms of direction as to like, do we want to keep basically where we're at, knowing the cost that's associated with that? Or if the answer to that is no, then how far do we look to realign priorities, to realign spending? Is it a haircut to say we want to keep things mostly the same, but we know we can't, we can't take on another 9%, so we're gonna cut it back a little? Or do we say this is the time where we actually have to cut it back so there's nothing, or whatever the number might be? And I guess I don't have a good sense from the room, like where we're at, like, or how we would know where to get to there.
I might offer one other thing for consideration. It has pros and cons as well. How much money gets applied to reduce that 9% to buy time? Time to see what the commission does, time to think more deeply about where we go. The risk in that is if you don't use that time well and you don't make the decisions that may be hard to make to position yourself better, you just dug yourself a bigger hole than you already had.
I think that's for me, the key idea is the sense of the time at which we think it's most prudent to move forward, given the uncertainty from statewide education funding, right? If we think they're never gonna figure their whatever out, well, then we might as well act sooner than later. Like if we think
Yeah.
there's actual big change on the horizon, then for us to really reconfigure everything in advance of something that we don't know the new landscape feels like a really bad choice. And so I
Yeah.
think, sorry, go ahead.
The part that really came up this spring, right, is the importance of the community feeling like it wants to be heard, it wants to have a say, it wants more communication, it wants to establish trust. And so when we think about this time that we have, there are a couple of things. One is this is time that we can use to really focus on how we're communicating with our partners in the community and how we're building trust to be able to make those hard decisions, because consolidation is, no matter where you go, it is a horrific experience for communities that go through it. Like it's called the third rail for people who study education policy. Like you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to do it. So using our time now to really establish our connections would actually be a really smart use of our time. And the other part I just wanted to pop in because it took me a few minutes to think this through. If we're talking about next steps to support our community for communicating out to the state, the Commission on the Future of Education is not doing any outreach with legislatures. I just saw their outreach plan. It's not finalized, but they're doing it tomorrow. And they're also not doing any outreach with anybody other than like the president of UVM or the Vermont Superintendents Association. But they are having public meetings. And so I would be happy to do something like post on Front Porch Forum to be like, if you're interested in having a say, here's who you can join, because it is not something that they're actively soliciting feedback. It's actually quite hard to get in there. So how we engage with that process, I think, is something that's a little bit more complicated than what's usually done in Vermont, where there's usually a lot of transparency. I can't see anything. I can't see anybody else, but I'm hoping that was a logical combination of things I'm trying to say.
To be honest with you, we end up asking more questions and receiving more questions in return. I mean, one, we have to start asking ourselves, why did Secret Service?
I was like, how are we talking about Secret Service?
I think the two other issues that came up last spring that I think we have to get some, sort of get out in front of, and one is the comment that, with declining enrollment, the administration was having more employees or whatever the argument was. And so I think we have to get out there on that in terms of, looking at administrative costs and whether there is any way to reduce them or the reasons why there's no way we can reduce them. Then the other one, of course, is the building, the housing in Munsell Avenue issue. Where we are on that. I mean, I think just so taxpayers know where we are.
That's a discussion item for later too, just to talk it through. I'm curious about that same issue.
Liz has had her hand up for a while.
Liz, was your hand up from before or new?
It was new just because I know that those were unpleasant things to say. And so I appreciate the reaction that everybody's given. And I guess my two thoughts are that we have had powerful community engagement, and to me, what I hear loud and clear is of prioritizing services for students above all else, prioritizing access to education in all of the ways that shows up for our kids at school. And also, what do we have for reserves and how can we buy time? And I would love to wait and see what they come up with. I would love to have support for decision making going forwards in what direction, and having clear guidelines and things to work with that make it much easier to have hard conversations when there are that kind of engagement and boundaries, like our class sizes, right? So we have class size boundaries, so that helps us make good decisions around that. So that's what I would hope, that sort of support is what would come from the commission. But I also am wondering, what do we have for reserves to buy time? Because my understanding was that we were doing that this year, and that's how we got to this year. So do we have resources to buy time?
The answer is yes. The question is, how much time does it buy us? How much of a tax break does it buy us? One of the lesser knowns is not finalized is what would a fund balance be that we could apply to offset taxes next year, which is part of the funds that we could use. We have estimates now, and that will get finalized with an audit, but yeah. Well, I think we have about $1 million in the education reserve fund, some of which is spoken for. So I don't know what that balance is now. We can get that. Those are basically the two pots of money: fund balance and education reserve fund.
We're looking at 1,024,000 in the ed reserve currently, and projecting fairly confidently, and I haven't shared this with you because we just came out of the audit with all of the work, but we think we're gonna be close to $500,000 in our fund balance for the end of the year as well. So you have 1.5 million to work with, which buys about 8 cents off the penny rate for the taxation. That's an impactful number, and we have no money.
And that's
And we have a
$1.5
$1.8 million hole or $1.5 million hole for next year.
Right. That's the greatest concern, is if the time that it buys isn't used to create the efficiencies, it's a much bigger hole to dig out of next time around. And that's part of the challenge with, not only do we not know what might come out of this commission, we don't know when it will be enacted. Historically, these things don't happen overnight. It'll be a year that they sort of talk about what will get done, and it will be probably at least a 3 to 5 year rollout of whatever that change is going to be. So exactly where we fit in that queue and the impact and how that affects our timing is tricky to really kind of pin down.
I just wonder, I feel like the cupboard is bare and it's getting barer, and they just keep charging us more.
I know.
And it's our kids who are ultimately suffering and getting programs cut. And how do we consolidate this or do this or do this or do this? There will always be some solution to just get it down a little bit, to get under that wire. Meanwhile, the next year is like, oh yeah, here's your increase, here's another increase, here's compounded increases. And I think that's the issue. Like, how do we advocate for our children and at least keep this, level funding or better? How do we get better for them?
I think it's important to note that, what's the first rule of the whole? Stop digging, right? And when you think about our position with unfunded required positions being added to our payroll, I mean, we have a full-time director of safety that the state requires us to hire, and all of the costs that go with that. That's 2 parents. And we don't have a choice. Right? So it's important to recognize exactly what you're saying, and recognize that as fast as we're digging out with a spoon, we have help from Montpelier filling us in with a shovel.
Exactly.
How many of those positions that were unfunded positions that we're required to have can serve a dual purpose? Is there some other position in the district that the safety officer could fulfill?
Like adding HPV and.
HPV,
We've got 3 roles coming out of that one.
So that safety
Okay, so
director,
we are
right?
using.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
safety director is our Title IX coordinator, which is a position we're required to have. Also assists with HHB investigations, which are super time consuming.
There you go.
And all the crisis planning expectations, including the more recent requirement of district spread assessment team.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the first position. I'm sorry, Patrick. What was the first position you said?
Director of Safety, so that position.
No, I got that, but then you said dual purpose and you named 3 things. I didn't hear the first one. I'm sorry.
Title IX coordinator.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
Title IX actually has 3, you have to have a coordinator, which is separate from investigator, which is separate from initial decision maker. And those are all 3 quasi, either administrative or quasi-administrative responsibilities.
A lot more discussion to come on all these questions we have percolating, but
Sorry to close this out. At our next business meeting, can we have like kind of a synopsis of the Levinson report? Because there's some new board member and it's like hundreds of pages.
it's not.
Or it's not.
Digest, but that
I
is,
know, we have new members here. I took a gander at it maybe last summer during the facilities, one of the facility meetings, but that would maybe help us start to think about that type of stuff, regardless of what Montpelier is doing.
Patrick had shared sort of a breakdown of options they had explored, but I agree that having
That was
the
April
board do
1st.
that, yeah, the board do that. That was something I was interested in having finance and facilities sort of dig into. And we can talk about that later, but I agree that having some sort of game plan or contingency plans and such is gonna be really, having multiple options is gonna be really important, I think, this time.
It's all, that whole Levinson report it's under school board facilities planning resources and facts. There's a summary, spreadsheets, appendices.
As far as like,
Could be one somewhere.
yeah, and I think though, like synthesizing that for us as a board and then saying, here's for your things, knowing where we are,
Got it.
that would make sense. I think that's the work we haven't done yet.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna move us on for sake of time, because we're at almost 8 PM and we've got a few other things on the list.
Well, thank you for pulling this all together in August.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Happy
it.
to start the conversation early, given what we're going through.
So next in the agenda is an update for the financial report. Any questions, thoughts, concerns, things you'd like Floyd to talk about?
I want to understand the FY 23 prepaid of 76,649 that's still sitting out there. What is that?
I couldn't quite hear you. Say it again.
Sorry, the FY 23 prepaid that's listed with the fund balances for 76,649.
Was revenue that was mistyped into our system at 6/30/23 when it should have been 6/30/24. We made an adjusting journal entry that it will be fixed coming out of the audit.
So with that being said, it would come out of your net assets and into revenue. So would that 494 go up by 76?
It's being allocated to the food service deficit.
So it's already baked into the 494.
It's already baked in, yes.
So if it's already baked
What-
in, then why on the, like, the fund balance, sorry, with reserves where you listed out like the 76, the 1,024, the 17, if it's already baked into this 494, why is it listed separately as 76?
I'm trying to catch up with you.
Sorry, I'm on page 1.
Yeah, I know, I'm right there
Yeah.
now. And so it will feed into the food service 3,100 revenue that ran as a deficit and carried forward as a fund balance in there in anticipation of the inability to fully fund food service in 25, that we didn't have enough money budgeted for that separate revenue fund. And that's where it came from. It's a revenue in that special revenue fund of food service. It's listed here in our total as a prepaid. Let me pull it together clearer and get to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Floyd? No? Okay. Then we'll move on to the board management and governance section of our agenda. So the first is an action item. I had a request from a community member to amend their public comment. And the first time we followed that, it was a little bit of a complicated process for me in figuring it out. And after talking with Vicky about how she takes minutes and what that process is, I understand it more about what she's trying to do. So earlier today, you heard me request one of our public to submit that full request, and that's gonna be what I asked for going forward. And I'm trying to figure out a good way to make it so that people can submit that easier. But essentially, we'll just take full public comments if people would like to make them, and I will just attach them as part of the agenda instead of going back and forth to amend comments. So this is the first time we're doing it that way. I hope that feels comfortable to people. So if I could get an action or a motion, sorry, to amend the board minutes for 6/18 with the requested amendment to the public comment. So moved. Melissa,
Second.
Justin, all those in favor of amending the 6/18 board minutes, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Next is an action item to approve the board work plan and meeting dates. If you remember, many moons ago, we went over the meeting dates and had moved a couple because they coincided with vacation times. But this should be up to date and everything should be good to go. So can I get a motion to approve the board work plan?
So moved.
Kathy?
Second. Justin can have it.
Justin, any discussion about that? All those in favor of approving the board work plan and meeting dates, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions. Okay. Next, we had a little bit of fiasco this year determining our board retreat date. Because we did it too late. So I would like to try to get some semblance of agreement about, I would like to keep it in August. I know that's rough for some people, but it sets us up well for doing our board work. And if we could just try. Justin, what'd you just say?
I'm looking at August 2025,
Mhm.
the 13th, that Wednesday. Word to in that week.
You may have nothing booked on that day. Europe.
I know, that's the.
Now I have to obviously be elected in March, but if all goes well, I'll be here. I'm on vacation from the 2nd to the 16th.
Of August.
Yeah.
We go later than the 16th, I'm afraid that week of the 18th, we start having staff back, but obviously that calendar is not built yet either, but this would be the week that starts happening, so.
Can we have it in Maine? I'm kidding.
I second that motion.
July. I know, I'm trying to put July. Well,
We're taking July.
sorry, okay, sorry.
That's it.
That was really nice.
Don't put on me first, so just do that.
We're never gonna.
Well, she said.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the 6th?
We'd have one person already that we know couldn't, but I mean, not the end of the world. We'd love to have you there, Sarah. We're just throwing out ideas at the moment. So
Sure.
I I'd like is just to have some idea that people are thinking about sometime mid-August. We're all getting together. So what I can do, if people are feeling like sometime in the week of the 13th or maybe those first 2 weeks of August, first 2 full weeks. I'll send out a little poll, you just fill it in with best you know now, and then we'll go from there, but I'd like to not run into the issue we had before where it's an issue.
We'll have it Bristol again. That was a really nice.
Do we like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just turn up the heat.
Yeah. And that, I think that was a happy little accident, but that,
Yeah.
it was a good space. But yeah, we can talk about that as we get closer.
And if that was the only time that worked for everybody, I mean, it's really not that far of a drive. I've driven back for other things before, so possibly I would drive back.
That's commitment. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. But I'll just send it out and we'll see what we gather up. So there was an action item to determine the board retreat date. We can make a friendly amendment. Or we could table that action.
We table it until the pool goes out and then we affirm it at the next meeting.
Thank you, Melissa.
Second.
Thank you, Kathy. All those in favor of tabling that action item, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No abstentions. Okay. All right. Next, we have an action item to complete the board monitoring report sign up. So we can just open it. I think some people are pre-filled in here.
I just went in and threw my name in. Was that not the right approach?
That's what I did.
Okay.
Check
Totally
off the
fine.
to-do list.
I was like, I feel like somebody's name needs to be here, so I just typed mine in.
Yeah. Okay, so we need. So I don't see Daniela in. Well, Sarah, who's new to the process. So we still need Sarah and we need Daniela. And how we've done it in the past too is that we can pair you up with people who've done monitoring reports before, who are comfortable with it, and can walk you through the process, and that makes it, I think, a little less cumbersome.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yep, well, mine's not till December. It will be my first, so. Yep.
Absolutely.
Who wants to be my friend?
Yeah, I've done them for a previous board, but obviously not this board, but it would be great if somebody could mentor me through that process.
Sure.
And that be by myself or with one of the new members, what we need.
So you're at 3.1.
Yeah, I'll go for 4.1, it doesn't
Okay.
matter to me. And I can do that solo or with a new member, depending on what we need.
Okay. So Mike, those would be kind of back to back, but
Yeah, so
okay. All right, so let's put you on 3. Can put you on 3.1.
Yeah.
Okay. And then someone for 4.1. Who else don't I see? Is that everybody? We're missing one Starksboro rep. Sarah, I'm gonna put you in for 4.1, which would be in September. And we'll talk about it more as it comes around.
Okay.
And I'll put myself in, I'm not typically board chair, don't, but I will.
Well, Danella needs one.
Daniela needs one.
Oh, true.
Sorry, Danella, but we gotta do it. You gotta do it.
Yeah, she's not here.
Okay, good. See, nobody, she won't even know that. She'll watch it.
Thank you for pointing that out. Okay,
Mike Dash is doing two.
Mike Dash is doing 2.
Oh, where is that?
And if we
Balance
get,
about it.
yeah.
I can do the part now while I can.
You do all of them.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Would you like mine?
And if we get a Starksboro member in between now and then, we can.
Sure.
Plug them in. Okay, so. That's that. So can I get a motion to complete the board monitoring reports sign up?
So moved.
Justin?
Second.
Barb, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstention. Okay. So I'm going to open this up by asking for a motion first. So the action to approve the expenditures of up to $25,000 from Ed Reserve to support the Portrait of a Learner and strategic planning process with Up for Learning. So can I get a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Barb,
Second.
second, Melissa. Any discussion? We tried to sum some of this up in the chair notes. Does anyone have any questions beyond the chair notes or need any clarification about what we're doing or have questions from what we saw at the retreat? Feeling good about it, understand why we're doing it.
Not a full upfront 25K. It's, I'm reading through like the timeline.
It's a little bit of a, sort of a range because of how much they facilitate for us and how much we take on ourselves. So there's a little bit of sort of opportunity in there to kind of see how it unfolds, but making sure that we have what we need if we need it. That's why it's structured as an up to. If we end up needing less, that 25 was on the high side for the two kind of processes that they would help us with. And if we need less than that, then we're covered by the up to language.
I guess maybe the only concern I'll voice, and I think I'm generally in favor of this, is like, I wonder like, if the current proposal really captures like what we as a board needed and we as a community needed, right? I think we set out this path with Krista, sort of like really thinking about DEI and inclusivity and sort of an audit. And they articulated that that would be an important part of this process, especially with bringing in lots of voices. So I guess I just want to emphasize that if we do go forward, that we're very clear that should be a critical component of it. And then I guess the other question I had was just about the scope of this. It sort of felt like we were going to sort of define this portrait of a learner. And I just, the back of my mind worries a little bit, like, is that really going to look any different from the sort of portrait of a learner that we sort of created in the last few years, right? Like, is that really where the tension is with what the community needs? Or is it more specific, right? And maybe this is a place where we have to start to get there. I guess this is maybe a question again about timeline, right? It feels like if we feel really pressed budgetarily to do something big, this feels to me almost too slow or too big, too broad to get us moving forward to the thing that we need to do. But if we're able to like buy time and simmer, then this builds a foundation for us to then have those really important questions about what we actually do to the district, sort of scaffolded by what we want the district to be able to achieve. If that makes sense. And so I'm okay if that's the timeline, but if it isn't, it feels like this might be spinning our wheels a little bit in a less directed way than maybe I thought we originally set it up.
Mike, can I respond to that? Because I feel like at the retreat, I had that question too, and it was answered by the folks that presented in how they were gathering information to create what that portrait might look like and how the roadmap of how to get there. And therefore, I felt a little bit more at ease with the process. So if the community and the learners and whoever else is in on that responds the same way they may have 5 years ago, then we're going to get the same portrait. If not, it might reflect where we need to go. So that was my takeaway. So I don't know.
Yeah, and again, I'm not.
If anybody else
opposed to
heard that.
this, this was the.
That was something that I was thinking about as we were listening to folks from Up for Learning and even early on in our initial conversations. Knowing that at some point hard decisions are in front of us, having real clarity about toward what end are we making hard decisions seemed important. And given how every year for the past 5 years, this board or various iterations of it have really questioned the ends monitoring report, which prompts conversations around the ends, and do the ends really say what we want them to be? They're probably 12 years old now. So in the context of everything, this opportunity to come back, and even if it is to say, yes, 12 years ago, still stands, that's exactly what we want. We reaffirm that is what we want. So when we set out to figure out how to achieve that in an affordable way, we have that guiding light that right now, that light, I think, has lost its glimmer a little bit.
Yeah, I think we have to start here.
Yeah, and so I guess for my, if that's the case, and I'm totally on board, I think that's probably the right thing to do. It's sort of, that sets sort of an implicit timeline for what we want to do about the budget, right? Like the conversation we had earlier, we're like, oh, do we make big structural changes or we consult, like, if our true belief at this moment in time is we have to define as a community what we really want in our learner and then figure out how we're gonna get there, that sort of sets us up for this budget cycle as we need to minimize pain in terms of increased tax burden whilst trying to maintain, I mean, we need to do kind of last year,
We need to buy
but
some
better
time
and
while
buy
we do
time.
this, yeah.
And so I guess that mentality coupled with this activity feels to me like a really prudent and thoughtful way forward if we feel like that's the way we want to go. But I'd hate for us to set this up and then simultaneously be like, oh, and now this is all the things we're gonna do to the budget without waiting for this. That feels like we're working against ourselves.
And then how do we get that out to the community to say, these two things are happening in tandem?
Exactly, and I
Yeah.
think maybe it's just clarifying our message.
Yeah.
Right, if the message is, you think that this is the right path forward, and look, we've got the right consultants to help us get there and make sure voices are heard, to affirm what we need, right? We think we're not gonna be over the tax threshold, so we can minimize this year over year impact to some degree, so we have a little bit of time. Like, if that's the narrative, maybe that's a narrative that the community receives well. I hope it does, because I think it's the right one. But we can sort of sell that as a board for why we're moving forward in the path we are in both cases.
Can I just add that I think, having gone through so many different iterations between the ends policy and my former district for the last 30 years. What I see very differently with Up for Learning is their incredible commitment to being student forward. That I have not seen yet a group that absolutely will not move unless they've got kids facing front. We spend a lot of time talking about our kids and not enough time talking with our kids or having them talk to us. And so that's what I really think is different about Up for Learning in a way that could go deeper than checking a box or trying something, but really kind of change the fabric of what MAUSD is, which really should be the voice of the kids and not us speaking for them or amongst each other or hearing two kids talk, but actually that's not representative of a larger group. And that's what they commit to that I feel is a little bit different than other groups or consultants that we worked with before, or leave it to our devices to try to figure it out. And then all of a sudden we have two failed budgets and that gets pushed off to the side, or we can't fill positions to help us do that work. So I feel like, to me, that's going to make a bigger impact. Whether the timeline's going to be perfect for all the work we have to do in the next 4 months, probably not. But is it deeper, and will it help us make harder decisions with students at the table for next year and year after and year after? I think so.
I also want to acknowledge, I think DEI has a critical role in that process that we would engage in with Up for Learning, and they would agree. And that is still different than the work that we had talked about before, and to your point. So I think, and I think we were sort of estimating somewhere in the $100,000 range for a consultant to do that deep dive. There's still room after this to do some more really explicit DEI work. So I think that can happen also and not be backburnered.
Perfect. I think that would be worthwhile, given the sort of overwhelming community support that we had at those previous meetings, to make sure that those voices are still being heard and incorporated as we move forward. I
Liz.
think I'm more opposed to this than I am. Totally on board.
Liz?
Yeah, I really like the way you explained that. It made a big difference for me because it's always been a goal to get student voice, but it's only really ever heard for me in relationships with students that we know, right? Students that are in our lives. We hear their voices, but it's hard to hear it the way that they are committed to getting it out there. And that's our unifier, right? That's the unifying goal of everyone who's involved with anything with the school is meeting student needs. So I think this could be really powerful. And I'm excited about it. And I'm excited about having it and finding a way to meet needs this year and reduce in any way possible to get a reasonable budget put forward. I just want I just would love to really have all of the options out there. So I like the idea of the Levinson report getting involved here somehow. And we, I mean, there are other things that have nothing to do with structural change that can also address student needs and that are within our power right now at this moment. And that is also say there is a school that is well equipped to meet the needs of a student in some particular way. And a lot of districts around our state do choice amongst their elementary schools. And so if change is looming in the future, we do have power right now to say, well, we do have this fully accessible playground that went in through grant funding at Bristol Elementary School this year. That's really beautiful. And because our schools are unique, they do offer unique advantages. So there are ways that in the meantime, we could help more immediately address potential concerns that come up. So.
Any other thoughts about this approval?
So is it our goal with $25,000 invested in this is that the students will have a voice, and it looks like they've also included community members, staff, teachers and administrators, parents, caregivers, and community members. Is it our goal to have data that informs the ends policy for the new generation, basically?
I think
So that is our goal.
That and a strategic plan that needs to be built.
Potentially a different ends policy as well.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the goal.
Right,
is
but
a
we're gonna
different
have data that will inform those changes.
Yeah, exactly. And then hopefully investment from our students into what they would like to be able to accomplish when they're leaving Maui.
One of the other things that Upper Learning mentioned that really resonated with me is the recognition that the process is as valuable as the product.
Mhm.
So having a new ends, having this vision, like that's all really great and useful, and we can lean on that. And the process of the community coming together to shape that is maybe even more valuable than that product. And can help build trust and do some of those things that we've said a lot of times.
Some healing work in there.
Mhm.
So as I look at the schedule, the final retreat in March of 2025, which is gonna put us right at town meeting day. Is to review progress and a draft of the final report. The final report will serve as a catalyst for reflecting on and planning next steps.
But we have a data analysis retreat in January, so we might have some data to help influence our budget conversations.
Well, and that kind of speaks to Mike's point about timeline, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this work with Up for Learning maybe in some ways could inform the FY26 budget, but really it's about the FY27 budget.
Okay.
And that's where that concept of buying time with FY26 for this work to happen, to position ourselves to do something pretty significant for 27, which maybe buys us enough time to get some clarity from the Commission on Future Public Education, maybe not, just because of how big a machine that is that's got to move. But it's at least a shot at buying some time. And I don't know, my concern is if we decided we needed a subsequent year of bought time, I don't think we have any gas in the tank left to do that.
Is this something that we could do in-house? That's gonna be a question that's going to come up. Could we save the $25,000 and do it in-house?
I think,
Not as effectively.
yeah, I think a third party is what is going to make people who currently have told us they don't trust the administration, they don't trust the board. I think the third party is extremely crucial in this situation. Because I think it's gonna help us build the trust and I'm hoping, and they'll feel comfortable having those conversations and being open. And I hope by us potentially approving this in a few minutes, they'll see that we do care. And this is part of that work to show that we do care. And this is important that they are heard from caregivers to parents, to teachers, students, everything, all of it. That's my.
I agree. I just wanted to hear from administration that this level of investigation is not possible with the resources we have in the district.
Yeah. And this is their expertise. This is what they do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too, right? This is what they'll be focused on, whereas it would take our staff away from everything else they have to do. And I don't think we'd be able to give it the attention it needs at no fault of any particular person. It's just resourcing.
And I'd rather have our staff be participants in contributing their thinking into this than focus on the process and not contributing their thoughts.
Yeah, and I'd rather have their time focused on kids.
Yeah.
And collecting data.
So. All those in favor of approving a expenditure of up to $25,000 from the Ed Reserve Fund to support the portrait of a learner and strategic planning process with Up the Learning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Next, action item is approving and monitoring for 4.8. Can I get a motion, please?
So move.
Justin?
Second.
Mike? So this was just me removing one spot in the narrative about a reference to 5 towns. Everything else was approved. Whenever I submitted it back when. Any other thoughts or discussion? All those in favor of approving monitoring report 4.8, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions. Okay. Next, we have an action item to appoint members to subcommittees. So let's start by opening it. Can I get a motion, please? Melissa? Kathy second. Okay, so discussion. So because we had Steve leave policy and governance, he was the chair. And we have Ashley, and she was also in policy and governance. We have to do a little bit of reshuffling to make sure we have a balance of people in each committee, but also I think to make sure that we have a balance of not expertise, but like experience or whatever. So Sarah would need to be appointed to one of the committees anyway, and then rethinking how we might help policy and governance, because they have a lot of important work coming up. Like next meeting, they really gotta hit the ground running with stuff, as does CEC. So I'm open to thinking about how we reshuffle those. I had one idea myself about me stepping out of community engagement, moving to policy and governance to chair that, and then asking someone who's been in CEC to step up and do that chair work there, because you all have been there for a bit. But if someone else feels like they would like to jump into policy and governance and head that and do that work, I'm open to that as well. Thoughts?
My only concern is that putting too much on your plate, Mary.
Yeah. Well, I chair the CEC, so
Well, I know, but-
either way, CEC has been as heavy
It has
too,
been.
yeah. Yeah, so either way, I appreciate the thought, but
Who else is on the CEC?
we have
Barb and-
Kristen and Barb, Liz, and they've all been in there a while, so they know what's up. So if I moved over, that would be 3 in policy and governance, 3 in CEC, and how many in 3, 6, 4? Yep. And then Sarah needs to be appointed somewhere. Yep.
Sarah, where would you like to
I was
be?
just gonna say, Sarah. Willingly.
Well, I mean, obviously where I'm needed, I have a fair amount of experience in policy work and I love finances. I really, to be honest with you, I could, whatever is most needed right now, I'd be willing to do. I know that's a very vague response, but really, any place I go, I'm going to learn something and I think I would be able to contribute as well. So whatever you think is most needed.
I'd say finance and facilities has 4 already, so let's take them out of the equation and think about community engagement or policy and governance. I foresee community engagement trying to come up with ways to be more interactive. This budget cycle, we've already got a good list of things we're already thinking about. So being planful about you 3 and your capacity to do all that work.
How about, can I just do policy and governance? That seems to be probably where there's an opening and where it would make most sense right now.
I'm okay with that.
I think that there's a ton of work there. There's a lot of work in all of them, but policy and governance feels heavy because it's a lot of words.
Yeah.
I like numbers.
Yeah, that's good. You're good there. But how do people feel about me going over to policy and governance and sharing that? Is there, like, I know you had talked a lot about.
It'd be nice to.
Do you want to?
No, it'd be nice to have you
Oh,
over here.
okay.
I was really looking forward to, working alongside Steve. The first meeting we had with Daniela and Sarah, and it was super informative.
Yeah.
I mean, he's already done a lot of,
Yeah.
you guys have done a lot of work in that spreadsheet and stuff, to continue the process, but I don't know, implementing new stuff seems.
Yeah,
Move
it was,
those around.
it was really Steve's baby, but we'll do our best.
Yeah.
Liz?
I think that change makes sense. And we'll talk among ourselves who wants to be the chair for CEC at our next meeting probably. And then I think the bigger question is who's going to fill Steve's shoes for negotiations, because I'm already brand new and definitely need support. So I wonder who's going to join in there.
Negotiations, I would suspect we'll get a notice from the union, usually right around November, and they'll invite us to the table. It is a decent commitment. There's no way around that. Liz, you've done it before, right? No, this is your first time? Okay. I've done support staff for 2 years. Brad, have you been involved in negotiations? No.
So what is like the time, not time commitment overall, but what it sounds like November, December, January, like what's the?
In a
time of the
perfect
year?
world.
Yeah, I know, negotiations always
So
go
like,
longer. I'm
yeah,
aware.
so usually you get an invitation around November, you start doing some planning stuff, you meet every couple weeks, and like every 2 weeks, you'll have a meeting, is what we typically have done. And usually somewhere between mid-November and February is like the bulk of it. You pick a date that you are hoping to have them done by, and you know that within the first couple meetings, what your agreement is and when you'd like to have the negotiations settled.
If meetings are still happening in March and April or later, there's 1 or 2 things that are a sticking point that you're working through.
Yeah. And we follow a different type of process, which if you were really interested in doing that, I could walk you through what that process is. And we would ask our mediator to do that work too, because a lot of the people we've used for negotiation are new on our end of things and just aren't used to the way that we do it. So we need to sort of refresh our course on that. But
For what it's worth, at the opening day, the union always has an opportunity to speak to the staff when we're all gathered in the auditorium. And the chief negotiator for MAEA was, because they're also looking for people to join for their side. And he described it as, it's not what people tend to think of when they think about negotiations. It's not an adversarial, it's sticky sometimes. There are hard things to walk through and there are hard conversations, but it's not this adversarial kind of experience that I think many think of in traditional bargaining.
I think my concern, which is why I was asking, is November through January, October through January is when I'm working 60, 70 hour weeks. So I don't think I can commit.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to point out that I forgot Kylie. So the finance committee actually has 5 people, not 4.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. Is there anyone who's feeling like they could make room to do the negotiations?
I could probably do it.
Brad?
I try not to be adversarial.
You might have to take the lawyer hat off. Did you have any interest?
I think I said, like, if we need somebody.
Yeah.
I will
We
do
need to
it.
do the thing on finance.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I'm reluctant, if somebody else is able to, I'm reluctant to sign up, but if they're not, we need somebody to do it.
Yeah.
Then I'll do it.
Mhm.
Do we have somebody on the Hannaford Career Center board?
No, we'll get to that in a second.
Just wanted to put it out there.
So we have Liz. I will say that having 2 of us in a room when they come with 5 or 6 representatives is a really tough gig. Not because it's adversarial, but because point counterpoint can get tough when only 2 heads are thinking at a time. So having at least 3 of us would be real great. So if we have Liz and Brad, I will do it if we need the 3rd person. That would mean I will be
I'll do it for you.
maxed out.
I'll do it for you. You're doing enough otherwise.
Yeah.
For sure.
Unless anyone else was feeling like,
These are evening meetings usually.
yep, and I could reach out to Kylie.
Food, there's food,
There's
forgot to mention that.
food, yeah, there is food.
Already went up on this one then.
Yeah, I nearly brought food this time. I was like, I can't. But we could also reach out to Kylie and we could reach out to Daniela to see if either of them had interest. So right now we've got Brad and Liz, and we'll reach out and see about a 3rd, and then if not, Daniela or Kylie, Mike or myself.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. And then we don't have it on the list of members to appoint. But yes, we do need someone to represent us on the Hannaford Career Center. Patrick, you had reached out to figure out whether or not that person had to be a board member or it could be a community member. Did you get any clarity about that?
I didn't, let me go again.
So we're talking about Brittany, Brittany Hills.
Yeah,
She'd
yeah,
be a great concept.
I agree. So we're trying to figure out whether or not it has to be a board representative. But I did run into Kim, who's our community, yeah, and she's the board chair there. And they're really interested to know who from us is coming. So trying to get her an answer as quick as we can. So I don't know yet. We don't know. We're hanging out.
Do you know? Not that I'm interested, but what's the time commitment for that?
It's similar to ours. I think they meet once or twice a month.
And they have subcommittees, so it depends what we sign up for.
They just did negotiations, right?
Yeah, they did.
That's done.
That part's up.
Yeah.
It's similar to us when not in budget crisis mode.
So he was doing a lot.
Absolutely.
So if no one right here, right now, and once we get clarity about community or us, we can bite the bullet then. So for now, we've decided on subcommittees, so negotiations, we've got Liz and we've got Brad. And a 3rd one hanging out. Finance and facilities is set with the same people who are on it. Policy and governance, I will go over to policy and governance, and we have Justin and Sarah. And Daniela, thank you. And then we've got community engagement with Barb and Kristen and Liz. And then hopefully we'll get a Starksboro rep and we'll fill them in where appropriate.
Erin, could you just, again, sorry, I got policy and governance, you're moving over with Justin, Daniela, and
Justin, Danielle, and Sarah.
The next one was.
And then community engagement is Kristen, Barb, and Liz. Yep. All those in favor of appointing those members to subcommittees, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Next is an action item to task the CEC with drafting a budget engagement process. So let's open the floor first. So can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Kathy,
Second.
Justin? Okay, so discussion for that. It's sort of come up organically already in this conversation about us wanting to really push out information and get stuff back, right? Get community feedback. So I was hoping that within your first couple meetings of starting this, you could try to nail down something. I'm looking at you, Kristen. I don't mean to just like drill into all of you. Really be thinking about setting up a process for engaging the community around this budget. It would be helpful if we had some sort of draft version of what you intend to do in September. So that when we hit October, November, December, and things might be getting a little more tricky, where we've got some sort of game plan, if that, I mean, that's ideal, right? But how it fizzles out could be entirely different. But it would be great if this board could task you with drafting that engagement process so that we hit the ground running as much as possible. Any questions or other thoughts about that? Is there anything else we need to talk about for anything revolving around that engagement process? So all those in favor of tasking the CEC with a drafting a budget engagement process, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Next is the discussion item. So in my chair notes, I sort of gave a synopsis of why we look at different things during our board work. So this would be thinking about a general focus of what we'd like to get a report on for curriculum instruction and assessment. I had listed a few ideas in the chair notes, but if anything comes up that other people have ideas about that they'd like to know more of. I know that we had talked about MTSFs at one point, people being interested in that, which we've done some work on in previous years. But does anyone have any thoughts about that in terms of like sort of thematic things we've heard from our community or that have sprung up for us?
One of the things we used to do, when the ends monitoring report first came out was we would try to highlight things you wouldn't necessarily see quantitative data on, or get information from me in a written form. So we would actually do a presentation of some sort around a different area in ends policy that you wouldn't see. The arts or science or health education, those other areas that you weren't necessarily getting data about, and it would be teacher and student driven. So we actually did like a mini science fair for the board one year. And those were pretty interactive and kind of interesting and kind of helped round out some of the other data sets that you do have access to. Just a thought.
Any thoughts floating around right now?
I only thought I mean, I like that idea, and I think I'd like something positive, right? And we spend a lot of time worrying about what needs to be fixed and what we're gonna spend, and I think if we can carve out a little bit of space to highlight successes or really interesting things that students are doing, I think it might be a nice part of the message so that every board meeting isn't just about It's a really vague task, I know, but.
No, that was right up my alley.
So, yeah, I was gonna say that's.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I really like that approach so that we can focus on some of the positive, all of the positive things that are happening in our district.
And it would be nice to, if we could take one strand and see how each school addresses it individually and the different methodologies that are employed to come to the same ends.
So are we saying throughout every meeting has a little presentation? Wouldn't that be fun?
If we can.
No, what I
You just took a little win out of Katrina's field.
Some color in
I'm nervous.
Okay, sorry, Katrina, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
All right, so
It could be like, over months, the arts, sciences,
We're gonna be doing some, sort of taking the superintendent's reports that you get monthly. And we're gonna feature each school in a video over the course of the year. To kind of take that concept, but really take it to the next level, in kind of a celebratory kind of way, like celebrate the things that are so wonderful, because as you have said, like. As administrators and as a board. Much of our day is filled with what's not working, fielding complaints and trying to problem solve. And we need to take the time to remember there are way more good things happening than bad, but you have to stop and pay attention to it.
Maybe something, I mean, I could just be living in an office, but like how our students are using the Career Center and like what learning are they doing there and bringing back and all of that.
We will have, so every year in the fall, very early in the budget process, we get a presentation from the Career Center superintendent director. So that's
Oh,
along
great.
those lines of here's what kids are doing.
Cool.
I do love the idea though of.
How about the kids?
Yeah,
I
I
love
love
it.
the kids, yeah,
Kids
actually
doing
showing you a
something.
project, some of
Yeah.
the 3D things they create or the. I went and saw one around creating a waterway for it, and they were using this technology that was amazing. That would be very, very cool to have
And
some
in-
of the students show you what they do.
In general, your hands on the students on every presentation, whether we do one every meeting or one every quarter or something, I think would, be amazing to hear those voices at the table.
Is there any reason we couldn't have one of our meetings at the tech center at Hanover? I haven't been in there in years. I don't know what the latest tools are that they have, what are their latest programs.
You could just talk to Kim and you could probably get a tour and all.
Wouldn't it be nice for the board to show?
Sure. Any other ideas?
Project quality.
Good.
So just for clarity, I think what I'm hearing, which what I'm taking away from the conversation is
Yes.
winter, December-ish, maybe a good time for a little jolt of positivity. A presentation that is sort of celebrations focused. Whatever those celebrations may be. Does that work? And maybe there will be others that come about from that, but at least for right now, what we're gonna begin thinking and planning for, it's that.
And it could, like, maybe we even, I don't want to give you too much direction, so just tell me if I am, but like, maybe it's like, if we're asking students, what's something that you're the most proud of? Like, why are you proud of it? What went into it? Like, give them a little framework, like they can kind of do whatever, but if we give them a little framework, why are you proud of it? Why is it meaningful to you? And why do you want to tell us about it? Or something like that to help frame the conversation. But then we might see something about the arts, and we might see something about math, and we might see something about English. I don't know. Just like that.
Student voice.
Yeah. Like I was really proud of our students that came and talked to us during the budget process.
Mhm.
And it was meaningful.
Clear enough? Yeah. Okay. Next, we have a discussion on the lease agreement for central office, and I'll let Patrick lead that one.
Sort of to Brad's point, it's something that's kind of hanging out there. And we are at a bit of a decision point. Soon, it doesn't have to be like a big decision, but our current lease is expires the end of September. So 1 month from now, we don't have clarity right now on where else we would go if not there.
2025?
So we have the option for a 1-year extension in our current lease, and that's what would bring us to 2025.
Sorry to interrupt.
And so that's an option to simply extend it for 1 year. We have been in talks with Kevin Harper, and he is open to a 5-year agreement. And there's a clause in there already that gives us, with I think a 1-year notice, gives us an opportunity to exit that agreement. We just have to give a year's notice, which isn't a problem with how long it takes to kind of do the planning that we're talking about. So in terms of options, so we have signed the 1 year. We have signed the 1 year and then hope that we could get a 5-year a year from now to give us 6 years. Hard to know exactly where Kevin will be and thoughts on the building a year from now, because things change. We could go right to a 5-year. It's likely not a popular option, but just in the exploration of all options, purchasing the current building isn't off the table from Kevin's perspective. And the other option would be to move somewhere else immediately, which is scary.
I think we buy ourselves with a 1-year lease, buy ourselves some time with a 1-year lease, and we can see where we're going. Hopefully.
What are the accelerations in the 5-year?
4%. So we did a calculation. If we did 5 years, so FY 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, the rent portion, not utilities, would total 430,000.
Incremental add.
What's that?
Incremental add to the budgets over those 5 years. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So 79,000 the first year, 82 the second, 86.
And when do you, I mean, you have to let them know in like a week.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few weeks, but pretty much right away. So the 1 year has some risk in terms of if we haven't figured out what we'll do after that 1 year and the 5-year comes off the table, we're in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah.
A 5-year with the 1-year notice clause gives us security for 5 years and an out with a reasonable window of time. So my recommendation would be to go with a 5-year. I guess I would say go with a 5-year, assuming that purchasing the building's off the table, as I said, but figure out what we're gonna do long-term as soon as possible, because paying rent is not chipping away at a cost that is finite. That's,
I mean, all the things that we talked about tonight, all of the variables that we don't know how they're gonna play out. I think that, having the opportunity to lock in for 5 years makes a whole lot of sense, because it takes a huge, I mean, we decided to do something totally different, whether we renovate existing space, buy the building, or find another building. It's a huge distraction from some of these other things that are, I think, probably more important, and also public perception standpoint. Maintaining the status quo is going to generate less controversy, less social media and such, than if we embark on some sort of more ambitious changing the status quo.
and we can get ambitious whenever we want, because
That's right.
even our most ambitious approach is gonna take a year to figure out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even if, when we start to kind of dissect the Levinson report or moving buildings and things like that, I mean, you're still a couple years out.
Right.
You know, so 5 years is.
5 years is short.
And I also think that it allows us to kick the can farther down the road. You know,
With a little less
we-
pressure.
A lot less pressure, and I'll put that decision off a little bit farther, because next year we don't know what the state's gonna do. You know, at some point, I mean, we've heard it loud and clear. At some point, we've got to draw the line here and say, okay, this is our responsibility. We've got to do something about these offices. Let's do it. And then we've got the Levinson report. We've got the data. We know what the costs are. We could do an updated cost within a year. We wouldn't be able to build it probably within a year. But with a 1-year extension, you know, I think that we'd stand in good stead to get this done pretty quickly.
Clarify the 1-year extension.
So we're invoking the 1-year extension this year. Correct? That's what
Well, that's the question. That's sort of the decision.
So if we
point
said
right
we
now.
have 1 year.
Do we want to invoke a 1-year extension now, or do we want to initiate a 5-year lease right now? It's sort
With
of,
a year's notice, correct?
right, so in the leases, we can give a year's notice and be out in less than 5 years, yeah.
So what is the penalty if we give a notice in less than the 5 years that we had contracted to?
I don't think, I'll look to you, Floyd, I don't think there's a
I
penalty if
think
we
at
give
this
the
point,
appropriate notice.
As long as the notice is a year or longer, Patrick and I were talking, really, the window is probably 2 years to go from decision to moving desks. That gives him plenty of time. For our view, 1 year is nothing. We can't get an office designed and built in a year in an existing space. We can absolutely move desks and go sit in a current space, but it won't have the ability to separate students from the central office. So anybody coming to the central office will have access into the school, if that's where we end up.
The only thing that could realistically happen faster than a year is buying the building, in which case 5 years is whatever, like, that's his ultimate, I think, preference is to sell, so. I don't think
But
that.
he will sell. I mean, the question for him is, selling Bristol Bakery, or I don't think that's what it's called now, but where he's producing the gluten-free products on a national level, working with the Walmarts and some private labels. He wants to sell that business, and the position he wants to be in is to be able to offer the space we occupy now as an add to that purchase for the purchaser to be able to grow that business to the next level. 5 years is probably a window that would work for him and for a buyer, given that he's looking probably within 18 months to have, I think if the right deal came along today, he'd sign it and he'd be out. So the business that he has is gonna sell. The question is, will the buyer of the business want expansion opportunities, which is the place we're in now? That's our risk. If we sign a 1-year extension and it sells, we don't have any options. If the purchaser says to Kevin, we want to buy it, we're out in a year, which is a really short window to make anything happen. I would say 5 years is the window that we want to lock into, given that it's 2 years to.
Right.
If we decided tonight that we're moving into one of the schools and we were clear on which one it was, and we started the process with designing the space, it's probably pretty close to 2 years before we.
2 years.
It's not next school year. it'd be the one
If
after.
we lock into the 5 years, what are our protections if he does
I was gonna just ask.
reach a deal with?
We have a lease
I know.
at the end of that 5th year. If we exercise to that end, we don't have any options.
No,
Actually, we're at the graciousness of the current owner. Right? If they purchased it for expansion, we don't have any options. If it's an investor that's purchased it, then we become very attractive because there's no additional fit-up costs.
But you're talking about during the 5
no, I'm
years.
talking about what if Kevin wants us out because he has a better deal, do we,
We have a lease
but there's no provision for
him to kick us out,
Liz?
for the purchaser.
I support the 5-year, and I also support having the superintendent's office location be a part of the greater plan. If we're going to wait and make a plan based, hopefully on some information once we know more from the commission, I mean, to go that next level up again, that next bigger picture of big things that could happen if it were a part of merger. This might not be only our, if they really are looking at reducing parallel systems across the state, maybe this isn't just our superintendent's office, right? So if you go that far and look and you're going to hold off a couple of years, then let's do that and make it a part of a bigger plan to possibly, maybe be sharing that cost with not just our 4 towns.
Patrick, just a clarifying question. So in what we're discussing this, we're not taking action on it. So what is the next step for you in this matter?
Well, I think getting some clarity from this discussion then positions Floyd and I to know, like, where do we want to go with this? And then we'll take it in that direction.
This is not.
I don't think this historically has been action taken by the board. So that's kind of the method we're approaching this with, but obviously important for us to all be having this conversation because it has long lasting implications potentially. So.
Any other thoughts about that? Okay. So we'll move into public comments for our second portion, and then we will move into executive session directly after that.
And I'll just clarify. So my takeaway from that conversation was, I think the consensus was 5 years. And that's what we'll move ahead, knowing that we have that one out. It's not unanimous, but I think that was the consensus that I took.
Okay, floor for public comment. Shauna?
Hi, guys. Thank you very much. I have just, I guess, questions for the future, or if we could get clarification eventually. As far as the contract goes for potentially for the lease, what it sounded like is making sure that there's no kick out clause that would allow the owner to currently kick you out if they did come up with a deal. And that is definitely separate from just having a lease. It's absolutely done in real estate transactions. So I think making sure that there is no clause that says, like, by the way, we can kick you out in 60 days is really important. I'm sure he probably wouldn't do that, but that's still important to make sure is there. The other thing that I'm really unclear about is why there's so much of a renovation going on at Beaman, especially like the 3rd floor upgrades to power, things like that, when we're saying that we don't have any plan for the central office, but it really doesn't make sense to have these significant upgrades at one of our smallest schools if we're not planning on moving central office there. It just seems like we're spending a lot of money at a school we might just be closing. If this is where we're coming to is more talks about closures, but yeah, we have no plans for central office, allegedly. It just doesn't really make much sense. And I think some more transparency on that would be a good thing. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yeah.
Okay. Kelly from Bristol again. So I would also like to talk about the work being done at Beaman as well as here at Mount Abe, because I heard the board talking a lot, and Patrick as well tonight, about being proactive with this next budget, so that we're not having a repeat of the struggles we had, with complete and utter lack of trust in the community, as well as passing a budget in a timely manner or on the first or second try. But what we didn't talk about was the things that led to that. And at least from my perspective, one of the biggest factors that led to that was our superintendent's miscommunication of how funds were being spent, misuse of funds, etc. when it came to construction projects. Now, tonight, Patrick did say at the beginning of it that construction does change the per pupil amount, that it does affect that. But when we saw slides where it broke down the per pupil amount in different categories, construction was left out of that. Another concern that I have specifically to the work being done right now is that from what the birdies are telling me, we're already over budget with certain things. And oddly enough, the amount that I'm being told that we're over budget pretty much matches what we have in the Federal Reserve Fund to a T, which if you remember previously, that's how it worked out too. We drained the Capital Reserve Fund, what we went over happened to be the same and are pretty close to the same. And so I'm worried that when we're saying we're being proactive, we're not actually being proactive in the things that majorly affected us. So making sure, and also there's some confusion too into the policy that was, or procedure that was put in on the $15,000 needing, anything over 15,000 needing to be approved, because it seems like even though we're saying that it's being approved, it's already been spent. So there's not really an approval. Also, when I looked at it, there wasn't really a good explanation, at least to the public, of what those figures represented, right? Like, is that a new transformer? Is that a new electricity pole? Is that new piping? You know, what is it? Is that going over budget? And that's what we're approving. And so that's still not being shown to the community. And the community's fears around construction spending are still very much there. And so my biggest fear on being able to successfully pass a 2025 budget would be a repeat in history, right? And so if we're being proactive, I would like to see from the board that we're doing something when it comes to construction budget so that we don't have a repeat in history. And while we know that the community is okay with coming together and doing public records requests, we can't do that on a preliminary budget. So we're relying on you guys. We, as the community, can't go off anything but what Patrick is saying. So we're relying on you guys to make sure that we are truly proactive in this construction budget and how these funds are being allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Can I say one more thing, actually?
Sure.
So it would be nice, two things, if the slides that we saw for the budget were put with today's agenda, because there's no way to see that. And when I was trying to take photos, you may have seen me moving around, the colors don't show up on the screen well. So the darker like reds, I can't read the numbers inside of them. So I don't even, being here and physically seeing it, I don't even really have a way to go back and look at it. So if that could be put up, that would be great. And then also, if we could get as a community some more clarity around what exactly you're asking when it comes to giving verbatim what we want to say in there, because when Robert's Rules has multiple different levels, at least 3, when it comes to public comment. So are you asking if it falls under 1, if you're, you know, all of them, so that we can be proactive and make sure, hey, do I need to record myself when I come up here so I can give you verbatim, etc. That'd be really great. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't see any other hands come up for public comment, so
Karen, can I just say that when there's a presentation like that, I note in the minutes that it is attached to the minutes. And then when I email Jennifer the minutes, I say, please note that Patrick's presentation should be attached to the minutes.
Yep.
So once these are put up, then it should all be together.
Yep. That's like a week out though.
I'm just saying what my practice is, so it's available, what the district does.
But really, it should have just been an agenda. And it should be pretty quick to just add that on, I would guess.
Okay.
Have a good night.
So we'll move into executive session under T1 VSA 5313A3. It's the same as it was before. We don't need to invite anyone in. So it's just a board conversation. So we can. Are you gonna leave?
Yeah.
Okay, you can.
If that's on the table as an option. That's on the table.
Yeah, so cool beings.
We accept your invitation.
As long as you're okay with putting stuff back in the box is all. I can stick around until you're done if you want me to come back and help put everything.
Yeah, I can't lock it, can
Yeah, but I can text IT and tell them they can early, lock up right away.
Yeah, that works too. I can give you my.
Yes.
We can just text, they're here at 5 o'clock in the morning. If something happens between now and 5 and they happen to come and find that box and dig the hole,
I? Oh, man.
I guess we'll roll those dice.
Or two. All right, so if you're public and you're joined on Zoom, we're gonna boot you out in a few minutes so we can do our executive session. If not,
Get a motion to go into executive.
I'm gonna do that right now. Thanks. So can I please get a motion for executive session? Mike?
Sure.
Justin? All those in favor of entering executive session at 9:09 PM, please say aye. Okay. Any opposed? All right,
I don't think there's anything else in here, right? So I
I
can
don't
do
think
this.
so, and this is done.
Back to.
Hey, Aaron,
Who is
Yeah.
iPhone?
We will kick them out in just a second, because we're not gonna start until the room's clear anyway.
So you'll finish up.
Yes, ma'am.
Do it after.
Good to go. Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
See you in a couple of weeks. Very good.
Good night. And then this is an open forum, though. I wonder if we should do a breakout room
Yeah,
and just in case.
Thanks all.
Thank you. for
Board.
Good night.
Actually, Texas when we get them.
So I'm gonna make a breakout room for you too.
That's that good.
Okay.
To my friends, and I leave my house.
Do you see an invite for a breakout room? No.
I mean, thanks for wondering, so I really felt.
I know, I'm feeling.
Oh, that's nice. This banana's not really cutting it, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I mean,
Whatever, recording. Okay, so we came out of executive at 9:37. And. Okay. Board evaluation is supposed to be done by Liz. Does anyone have anything they want captured in that board evaluation? It's the same one we run through every time. So Sarah, we do this at the end of every business meeting, and it's a way for us to collect data on how the board does, as part of our monitoring report system.
Was excited to have us already talk about the budget. I think
Yeah.
that's something to highlight.
Mhm.
That's something that we heard from the towns.
So
Important.
positive, yep. Any other positives for today we want definitely captured in those? Yeah.
Welcome to Sarah.
Yes, welcome to Sarah. Indeed. Anything else? Out before 11, very important.
We had really rich dialogue tonight.
Yep, rich dialogue for sure. Okay. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Kathy, second.
She's on her way
Melissa,
out.
all those in favor?
Bye.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Sarah.
Bye.